In patch 5.9, Zhong Kui got buffed. In the same process, he unfortunately also got bugged, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Let's first talk a little bit about what exactly got changed. He had two major changes that kind of are independent of each other, but also go a little bit hand in hand. The first one was a change to Demon Bag. Increase the stacks from 20 to 40, decrease protections per stack from 2 to 1. Zhong Kui now gains stacks when witnessing any death. He no longer gains stacks from consuming marks with Exorcism. Decrease stacks lost on death and after using Recall Demons from 100% to 50%. So this part is already a very big buff. With him no longer being dependent on using both his 1 and 2 on a wave, usually, to get the stacks along with his healing, he is a lot more independent of that ability combo being used on the wave. He can still do it to heal, but he can also just decide to clear with a 3, for example, or just clear with the 1 and not get the heal, and keep the other options open to use those abilities later, while also being able to get a lot of stacks very quickly. As it is witnessing death, it counts for anything. It counts for jungle monsters, it counts for minions in lane, it counts for your own minions, it counts for allies dying, it counts for enemies dying. You have so many ways to get the stacks that somehow you will always get at least some stacks. Even if your team's getting camped and there are no minions around, you will still get some stacks for your team getting camped. Combined with the fact that you never lose all stacks anymore, but only 50%, so even if you were to use your ultimate and die right away, you would still end up with 10 stacks, it overall seems like you will not struggle nearly as much with the stacks of Demon Bag and you will reliably have more protections. And then there's also the other buff to Book of Demons. The stun duration is increased from 0.5 to 0.9 to 0.7 to 1.1. The important part here is that the stun duration obviously, as most of you will know, doubles when you have marked the target with your 1 with Exposed Evil. That means that the double duration is increased quite a fair bit. It's increased by 0.4 seconds across all ranks. And that means that the maximum stun duration of this ability is 2.2 seconds, which translates to a total of 1.4 seconds on the lowest rank and 2.2 seconds on the highest rank in an AoE, which is a pretty good stun. There are not that many somewhat easy to hit stuns that will last that long. Now, Zhong Kui still has a bit of a wind-up, which is a downside, but still, it is a very impactful stun now if you hit it. And with you no longer depending as much on your 1-2 combo for stacks in general, you can also just consider throwing Book of Demons in the middle of a wave if the enemy walks into that wave and they're marked as well for a very long punishing stun. And that brings us to the bugs that were introduced. The first bug here is related to both Exposed Evil and Exorcism. If you mark more than 3 targets, you should normally not get heal for more than 3 targets. You would simply get damage on all of those targets off and you would get the souls, but you would only get healed for 3. Now you can get healed for as many targets as you're hitting with your mark. That means if you have a full wave, you can hit them all and then you can use your 2 and you will heal for 6 targets, plus possibly a guard that's in between there as well. With this not being in the patch notes at all and him being temporarily banned from ranked, I expect this to be a bug that will probably be fixed, because he really doesn't need that much extra healing, especially with all the other buffs that he's gotten. The second bug can kind of, depending on the situation, balance this out to some degree. And that is that the protections only double until 20 stacks. So this is basically set to the old value of when he only had 20 stacks, but each stack would give 2 protections. Now each stack gives 1 protection instead, and if you reach 20 protections and you ult, then you will still have a total of 40 protections. But past that point, the protections are somehow just added. So if you have 25 protection, then there will be an added 15 on top of that and you will still end up with 40 total protections. Which means that if you have 40 stacks, you will actually get no extra protections at all. And that's obviously not intended either, because the protections are supposed to double. And that would mean that we are not actually seeing his full potential at the moment, because his ultimate in a way is technically nerfed compared to beforehand. So Zhong Kui is now missing 40 extra protections at max stacks when he ults. This isn't all that noticeable though, in my opinion, simply because he has so much extra protection for most of the game that you actually don't feel like you're taking that much more damage in one situation. But then again, if this was fixed, then he would be a lot more tanky, especially in team fights, and outside of that, obviously, he's still as tanky as before. So we will see a different picture once Zhong Kui's bugs are fixed. He will be less sustainy than he is currently, but in return, he will be more tanky in team fights when using his ult, which I think is what is nicer in most situations. The other one is more for healing after the fight or when enemies are clustered up. But when do you really hit more than 3 enemies with a mark and the exorcism in a fight? So this is more of a lane sustain thing. While some of these changes weren't exactly targeted at Conquest, I think this overall gives them a massive viability boost also in Conquest. The fact that you can stack so easily and walk around with a lot of protections almost all of the time, while also having better CC and more flexibility in how you can use your combo, is something that really makes Zhong Kui feel different. I personally am still a bit in the habit of using the 1-2 combo way too often when I could use the 1-3 combo instead. But just knowing that it's possible and that the potential that he has is not even completely used by most players yet because they're still used to the old playstyle, means that we will see a hell of a lot more Zhong Kui, and probably not only in middle lane, but probably also in solo and maybe some other janky roles. As such, and as many people haven't actually played Zhong Kui in ages, I also wanted to talk a little bit about itemization. Now with items, we had some recent changes as well. This is worth keeping in mind in that context, and one that especially factors in here is Choose of Focus. When it comes to the start of the game, I think Mage's Blessing is fine on him. And he may not be the perfect guard for it, but it still offers a lot for him, and the extra mana is very nice for him especially. And then I like to add a Warlock's Staff tier 1 into that. The item that I finished first, however, is Choose of Focus. Choose of Focus got buffed. It's a lot better now in terms of its power compared to Shoes of the Magi. And the CDR for late game, to me personally, feels more impactful than that little bit of flat penetration for early game, because Zhong Kui is not an early game aggression guard. So I would always recommend Choose of Focus on Zhong Kui now. After that, I like to finish Warlock's Staff in most situations because Zhong Kui just is this tanky character that needs to be in the middle of the fight. He has the self-sustain already, and that's just where he's lacking a little bit. He's got the defenses as well, so health works very well for a big chunk of effective health. And then the item that I like to build for damage and pen primarily is Spear of the Magus, simply because he's got so many different ticking abilities that will shred some protection before you use your other abilities, and that goes through pretty much any squishy. And Obsidian Shard was nerfed once again anyways, so that's another downside for Obsidian Shard. So really for Zhong Kui, it is pretty much Spear of the Magus all the way, unless you want to invest into Voidstone, which can also be done if you want to go into a more bruiser, tanky type of build. That is definitely very effective too. After that, item choices are more situational. One of the items that is still relatively popular on him is Gem of Isolation, because it allows for that AoE slow with the ultimate. It's not necessary, as he also has a slow in his 1, but is a very nice effect if you can utilize it well. It also obviously gives him extra sustain, and the slow generally is good to chase enemies down, because otherwise many can get out of his ultimate. Another item that I see less, but I think is very interesting for him, is Shaman's Ring. Because of his main primary damage being a ticking damage source, it's very easy to get the Shaman's Ring applied before most of your damage goes off, and then use the rest of it afterwards. The damage boost is good, especially on the ultimate too, and the bonus movement speed is a little bit of a bonus gimmick, especially for him, as he kind of has to chase a lot of enemies down. He doesn't have that much mobility, so I really like that extra movement speed too. The next one is a little bit more debatable, but I also like this one a lot, Bancroft's Talon. Now Bancroft's Talon is a sustain item, and Zhong Kui has a lot of built-in sustain, so in that point it's maybe not as necessary. But the fact is that when he ults, people would either try to run away or try to focus him down quickly, and in that moment it helps when you get extra power when you lose health, so you deal even more damage, and you get some extra sustain on top. So I like that item for that fact, even though he already has sustain. There is the option to go into Rod of Asclepius. It has health, it has movement speed, which is nice, and it gives you a healing boost. I think this is not something that you should build if you're just building it for your own self-heal, but for example, if you have a physical healing character on your team that can't build it alongside with it. It can be useful in quite a few situations, and it's overall a pretty good item for Zhong Kui, so don't rule it out. Obviously, there's also Divine Rune. If you need anti-heal, never forget that. And there's also Pythagoras Piece. 200 HP, 24% lifesteal, 10% CDR and 70 power for yourself should really not be underrated for a character like Zhong Kui. Again, it has the same purpose for Bancrafts when it comes to sustaining a little better. It has the HP on top of that and it still gives you a decent amount of power, and it also helps your team, and Zhong Kui is a very teamfight oriented character, so it helps where it helps the most. As such, I think this is a great item for him. In the defensive department, we already talked about Voidstone a little bit. There is also Celestial Legion Helm. I think this item is a bit out of the meta basically, or off the radar, as for the most part people didn't even know how it properly works, and Hyris only now clarified that. And I think the stats are really good for bruiser mages that lead a bit of damage and a little bit of physical protection. So if you're against a heavy physical comp, I think that's pretty decent, and in combination with Voidstone it also has a pretty solid impact. Last but not least, there's obviously also Magi's Blessing if you need the extra CC immunity, because quite often people will just try to CC you while you're in your ultimate, and preventing at least one instance of CC is very, very nice. Items that I would generally recommend avoiding because the effects don't really synergize with his build or with his kit are Soul Gem, Soul Reaver, Ethereal Staff, Obsidian Shard as mentioned before, and Book of Thoth. With Book of Thoth it's just, if you want to stack, might as well build Warlock Staff. That's it for the items. I hope this gave you a good overview of what to build on Zhong Kui as well, and how the character is in general now. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the sub button with the bell. It really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.